Egyptian opposition leader mohamed+elbaradei has arrived in Cairo against the backdrop of escalating anti-government protests.
I have said a number of times that the right for peaceful demonstration is an absolute right of every Egyptian, of every human being. I wish that we didn't have to go to the street to impress on the regime that they need to change. We tried signatures, we tried boycotting the election, nothing worked. The regime, every demand fell on deaf ear.
Well, el-Baradei pledged to join opposition protests. He also called on the government to give a political response to the demonstrations. He said a security response would lead to consequences nobody would like to foresee. Anti-government protests are expected to escalate on Friday when millions gather at mosques for prayers.
Well, the U.S. has warned the Egyptian government and protesters to avoid violence as the protests against President Hosni Mubarak escalate.
There's an obligation by the government not to engage in violence. There's an obligation by those that are protesting not to engage in violence by burning government buildings.
Well, Robert Gibbs says Washington thinks the Egyptian government is stable. He added that the protests in Egypt are an opportunity for Mubarak and his government to show a willingness to listen to the Egyptian people. Gibbs also called Mubarak a close and important partner of the U.S. He declined to comment on the challenges to the Egyptian president's decades-long rule. Well, for more on that story coming out of Egypt, we're now joined by ramzy+baroud, who is an author and journalist, joining us via satellite from Seattle. Thank you very much for joining our broadcast. Now, how do you see el-Baradei's return to Egypt affecting the intensity of the protests there?
I think it's there is a possibility that el-Baradei's return might be part of a contingency plan, if you will, to kind of oversee the post-Mubarak era. I think there is a growing sense that the Mubarak regime it will either be eradicated after all of this, especially considering what could happen tomorrow, or at least there will be some serious changes in the nature of the regime in coming days and weeks. Therefore, el-Baradei's return might be related to all of this. I hope that this is not the case, and Baradei's return is more or less a personal initiative or an initiative related to his involvement in the democratic association that he's involved in and various political parties in Egypt are involved in. What really matters right now is not el-Baradei, frankly. What really matters is that the Egyptian revolution, the popular uprising in Egypt, is not co-opted and is not reduced to be that of the character of one individual or one specific political party, but rather to remain representative of the consensus that is being witnessed in Egyptian streets right now.
Right, although Obama has now asked for reform as absolutely critical in Egypt, a State Department spokesman refused to say if the U.S. would in fact cut aid to security forces that are now killing Egyptians. Do you see that as a bit hypocritical, or is the U.S. simply being smart?
Very much so. I think it's a position that is tainted with hypocrisy. And, you know, the term reform and democracy, as far as U.S. foreign policy is concerned, in the Middle East hasn't or doesn't really mean the same, or it's not understood in the same way that the populist uprising in Egypt, in Tunisia, and other countries are actually understand these terms. Democracy and reform means something entirely different. We are also looking at the term stability here. What does stability mean? Stability means the maintenance of the current regime, the current oppressive regime, and as far as he is willing to serve the interests of outside powers. Stability, as far as the Egyptian people are concerned, does not mean that at all. So when we hear such terms as reforms and democracy coming from the Obama administration, we have to be so extremely careful in how we decipher them and how we understand them. And frankly, I do not think that they at all mean what the Egyptian people have in mind right now.
Right now, as you know, Friday is always an important day for Muslims in the week. And will imams have the courage to speak out about the current unrest, or is Mubarak's hold on them strong?
It's really interesting because I've been listening the whole day to statements made by people who are affiliated with the Egyptian regime, and their positions are no longer consistent with their past positions. I think this is a very golden opportunity. What's going to happen on Friday is going to determine the future of this movement. If it ends up being co-opted, politicized, or factionalized, then this could in fact be the demise of the popular movement. Tomorrow is a very important day. As far as the imams are concerned, as we know, in Egypt, even the mosque is divided. And I am sure that there are those who are still going to hold on the collapsing regime very tightly, and because they are also tying their own future and their own interest to that of the regime. So we are going to see some of these voices tomorrow trying to basically rein in the popular movement, tainted, or in fact make all sorts of fiery statements regarding the perhaps a decree here and there that declaring them to be haram and that sort of thing. So it is so very important that we understand that there are those people who will always be insistent and consistent with the official position of the Egyptian regime, and they cannot be allowed to define the legacy of Egypt, neither tomorrow nor in the future.
I'd like to get a very brief answer on this last question, if I may. Many say caution needs to be taken when speaking of Egypt because it's no Tunisia. Do you agree? And does that mean change will be a lot harder to come to this U.S. ally?
Yes and no. Egypt and Tunisia are two different countries, different histories, different political contexts perhaps. But at the end of the day, oppression is oppression. The Egyptian youth, and behind them their societies and their communities everywhere in Egypt, are seconding a call of reform and change and democracy. That is very much genuine and very much similar to that of Tunisia. If anything, I think that Tunisia is a microcosm of what's happening in Egypt. They are a reflection of each other, but again, we have to respect the uniqueness and the historical specificity of each country.
All right, we will have to leave it there for now. That was ramzy+baroud, author and journalist, joining us via satellite from Seattle. Mr. Baroud, we appreciate your insight here at Press TV.
Well, on to